Welcome to Sounds of Resistance channel. The Ukrainian armed forces are advancing unabated both in the east and in the south and are retaking the occupied territories by the Russian army with lightning speed. After the Ukrainian armed forces captured the city of Liman and advanced 72 kilometers in the Kherson region, the Russian army in Ukraine began to flee to the Crimea. Even though Donbas and Crimea are seen as the ports where the Russian soldiers took refuge, the Ukrainian armed forces do not give the Russian army any rest in these regions. After Vladimir Putin announced that he had annexed the 4 major regions of Ukraine, panic in the Russian army grew as a result of the increasing attacks. The Russians, who feel the punch of Ukraine in their face, are inwardly criticizing Putin's decision. While the president of Russia stubbornly claims that the annexed areas are Russian territory, Russian soldiers are looking for ways to escape from these lands. At the same time, it is known that Russia has not been able to protect Crimea, which it annexed in 2014 and has been holding for a very long time. The Ukrainian armed forces carried out a series of attacks on Russian military air bases in Crimea and the naval headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. As a result of Ukraine's successful operations against Crimea, the offensive power of the Russian Navy in Crimea disappeared and Russia had to withdraw many fighter jets and warships. The mysterious explosion that occurred yesterday at the Russian military airport in the Belbek region of Crimea shook the world agenda. Huge explosions occurred from the Russian military air base, and Russian military aircraft are known to have crashed or shut down at the airport. The cause of the explosions is not yet known, but the possibility of an attack is under consideration. The explosion at the Sevastopol airport in Crimea is interpreted as the latest attack by the Ukrainian armed forces on the heart of Russia. When we got down to the details of the event, an explosion occurred at the Belbek airport in Sevastopol, which was annexed by Russia. Eyewitnesses post video of a powerful fire as the skies covered with smoke. The so-called governor of the annexed city, Mikhail Razvosaev, described the events as an extraordinary situation. Also, explosions were heard near the resort town of Lyubimovka, north of Sevastopol. Explosions in Crimea escalated after high-range MLRS purchased by Ukraine from its Western allies. Everyone knows that this is not a coincidence. Periodically, explosions have been heard in Sevastopol and other critical Russian targets in recent days. Experts point to the message under these attacks as an intimidation of Kiev to Russia, and it's predicted that the Ukrainian armed forces will attack to seize Crimea after Kherson. Especially at this point, the main reason for the increasing attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces in recent days is seen as the annexation declared by Russian President Vladimir Putin, as we have just mentioned. The Kremlin announced that the 4 occupied territories would become part of Russia after Ukrainian forces staged fake referendums in the region. The Russian army audited fraudulent votes in Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. Moscow now warns that any military action in these areas will be considered an attack on Russia. Putin, who has given the Ukrainian lands to himself, unjustly intends to rule in these lands. However, in the latest statements from the Kremlin, it is admitted that they do not know the borders of this region, which they see as their own territory. The Kremlin said on Monday it did not know where the borders of the territories it claimed to have recently annexed in Ukraine, the latest sign of political turmoil and improvisation accompanying Moscow's failures on the battlefield. The State Duma, the lower house of the Russian parliament, on Monday approved President Vladimir Putin's attempt to annex 4 regions in eastern and southern Ukraine, part of an official choreography. It was intended to add a glimmer of legitimacy to a movement that no other nation could. But frontline reality intrudes on the festivities. Since Vladimir Putin delivered a key speech on Friday outlining his claims to the 4 regions of Ukraine, at least 3 of them have suffered military failures. Russian forces withdrew from the key rail hub, Liman, in the Donetsk region on Saturday, while Russian proxy officials in the Luhansk and Kherson regions said on Monday that Ukrainian forces were making progress there. The annexation claims have been so mixed up that Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov had to admit on Monday that Russia's borders continue to shift as the Russian government has just defined them. He said the state would consider all Donetsk and Luhansk regions that make up the Donbas region of eastern Ukraine as part of Russia, although Russian troops did not fully control them. But in the other two annexed areas, which Russia also does not fully control, Peskov said it was too early to say this and that Kherson and Zaporizhia will continue to consult with the population of these regions regarding borders. Dmitry Peskov's comments showed that the Kremlin was increasingly struggling to explain these domestic setbacks as Ukrainian forces continued to push back Russian troops. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky made statements underlining the just struggle of the Ukrainians. Ukrainians are fighting for the right of life and freedom, happiness for all families and children, for what is right for any person on the planet. Zelensky said that Ukraine will continue to defend itself and will win this war, because Ukraine is on its own land. Truth and truth are on Ukraine's side. And the whole world, civilized world, will fight with us for life and freedom, for the right of happiness for all our families, for all our children. Going back to the results of the referendum and its implications for the region, Vladimir Putin signed documents on Friday to declare these Ukrainian regions as Russian. In a speech, he said that the results of the referendum are the will of millions of people. This marks another escalation from Russia in its war against Ukraine. After Kiev's troops made great progress in their counterattack near Kharkiv last month, however, Ukraine is liberating more and more of its territory in the region with each passing day. The superiority trend of the Ukrainian armed forces is expected to continue for a while. It could also happen to a large extent that Ukrainian forces could drive the Russians out of Crimea, which they annexed in 2014. It is clear that if this happens, it could be a devastating blow for Russia, especially Vladimir Putin cannot survive this coup. What I expect to happen in the next few months is that by December, Ukrainian forces are expected to be more successful in advancing towards Donetsk. All this is moving towards retaking Crimea. Once they get close, and assuming the Biden administration continues to supply weapons, I imagine Ukraine could be within range of Crimea. Crimea is thought to have become untenable for the Russians when rockets began to be fired at Russian airports and military installations in Crimea. Crimea is critical for Russia and to control the Black Sea. President Volodymyr Zelensky said, "What started in Crimea will end in Crimea." It would be a devastating loss for the Russians, but this is Ukrainian land. Now the opportunity has come and Ukraine can protect its own land. Putin is currently trying to reverse his army's struggle in Ukraine by mobilizing more people to fight. But that didn't go with the plan. Thousands have left the country on direct flights, and many more are trying to cross borders from Russia to neighboring countries like Georgia and Finland. The Russian president even admitted this week that his government made mistakes in mobilization. Many questions arise during this mobilization, and all mistakes need to be fixed and prevented from happening in the future. Russia also continued to struggle with the draft that Putin announced on September 21 in the far eastern region of Khabarovsk. On the border with China, Governor Mikhail Dektariev said that about half of the several thousand conscripted residents returned because they did not meet the requirements for military service. He added that the regional military commissar was dismissed. Taken together, the events of the day showed that Vladimir Putin's political system is under increasing pressure, although there is no evidence that the president's control over power is under threat. This system is now rotten and can be solved at any time. Thanks for watching.